Hello and welcome back to the Big C Church Podcast. We are in the middle of a series about evangelicalism. And want to tell you that over the summer, I and some colleagues of mine at Denver Seminary read a book called The Other Evangelicals. I've mentioned it, I think, in my episode with Dr. Mark Young of Denver Seminary, but it's called The Other Evangelicals, a story of liberal, Black, progressive, feminist, and gay Christians and the movement that pushed them out, by Isaac Sharp. There's some great reviews online. I know Scott McKnight blogged through it as well, I think on his Substack. And so as we're doing this series on evangelicalism, I'm bringing in other voices here to the podcast who represent some of these, have experience in some of these groups, different experiences with evangelicalism. And so I am honored today that my guest is Gabriel Pfeiffer. Gabriel, or Gabe, he and I first got to know each other when we were working together at Denver Seminary as he was finishing up his studies during the pandemic, as I recall, Gabriel.
Yeah, that's right.
And now he is a therapist with Grace Counseling Associates in Denver. He is also an adjunct professor at Denver Seminary, so our paths cross a little bit more as well. But Gabriel, thank you so much for being a guest on the Big C Church Podcast.
Well, thanks, Angie, for making room for these different voices on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Before we hit record a few minutes ago, we were talking about this episode is going to have a lot of loaded terms, and how the first episode ever of my podcast is about all that. So we have a lot of things we want to unpack with listeners today. So Gabriel, let's start by just kind of putting cards on the table about some of these loaded terms. So, and one of those is your sexuality, and I appreciate you being so open with your story. How do you identify? What words do you use?
So for me, it depends on context.
Yeah.
So often with like close friends and, in just how I talk to myself, I use the term gay. And gay to me just means attracted to people of the same sex. But I also know that gay can be a very loaded term, talking about identity, talking about lifestyle, talking about all these other things of like what that would look like to live that out. And so there are some spaces that I want to be considerate of other people, or not get caught up in the complexities and over explaining that in evangelical spaces, and maybe on Denver Seminary campus, or in some Christian spaces, I'll use the term same-sex attracted, and I think that comes from the tension, I guess tension's the right word, in like identity politics, of how are you identifying? Where is your identity? If it's in Christ, then you're not going to call yourself gay, because gay is an identity. And so that's your experience.
Yeah.
You're same-sex attracted, not who you are.
Yeah.
And I've been in different spaces where there's this reflexive ick when I use the term gay.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to avoid some of that conflict, I'll use the term same-sex attracted.
Yeah. So you're gay, which by that you mean attracted to men, or same-sex attracted, and you're a Christian.
Yes, I do identify as a Christian.
Yeah. So if you would just let's kind of tease both of those together. Sharing kind of those two pieces of your story. You became Christian, you recognized and came out as gay. Like, how did tell me about those two different streams and how and where they've met.
Yeah. So of course they're both happening at the same time, but they felt so divisive. They felt like two different journeys happening at the same time in my life.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I came out when I was 20 years old that they actually started to integrate. And that was over 10 years ago now. Wow. Which is crazy to think about. So my family got involved in church when I was in elementary school, middle school, just because my parents wanted my sister and I to have like good Christian friends. And it stuck with me. It really, I found a lot of closeness. A lot of my closest friends were at church and youth group. from an early age, I felt the need for a Savior, and Jesus, that love, that kindness, that goodness, really became attractive to me. And at the same time as that experience, growing up in the South, I didn't even have to be involved in church from an early age to know that it was not okay to be gay. So through high school and into college, there was such a divided experience that I had. I could not imagine saying both of those things at the same time, and I had to choose between one or the other. So in college, I was part of a ministry that in Memphis called Service Over Self. Shout out to them, SOS. They do such good work, but the culture that they provided on the summer staff team was just broke through a lot of those barriers for me to help integrate me and to reckon with all parts. So I got to know who Jesus was in middle school, but I really believe that I became a Christian in college, and coming out was actually part of that, because that was me truly reckoning with who I am, what my experience is. It wasn't going away. I would pray in tears for me to be straight, or pray in tears to have a different sin other than same-sex attraction or being gay. That God would just take it away. Or I would pray like Jesus, again, save me. I prayed this sinner's prayer. I don't even know how many times, just because I still felt like these things could not exist at the same time. Coming out was actually such a powerful experience, not in just saying that I'm gay, but in reckoning with reality and in reckoning with Jesus's love for me. And a person that was really formative in that was the first person I came out to, who's mentoring me and discipling me through my freshman year. We sat down and I said the words out loud for the first time to somebody that I'm gay, and he looked at me, and I genuinely expected him to get up and walk away or condemn me to hell. But he looked at me and said, "I love you." And he gave me a big hug. And, I was crying before, but then I was really crying. And that's what I felt like Jesus's love was when I felt the most unworthy, was when I was the most cared for, the most loved, and truly met, deeply, capital M, met. And that was a powerful experience. So the 10 years since, it has been an integrative process where it has been swinging back and forth. What does the Bible say about same-sex relationships? And what does God say about marriage? And then what does God say about who he is?
Yeah.
So it just kept expanding. And so, yeah, now it's hard to know what my faith would be without this experience, because it has been such a formative part of my life.
Wow. So you mentioned this mentor that you first came out to, but you were also maybe part of a church group. I'm sure you were getting all sorts of messages from all sorts of people. Yeah. What were some of the other responses? I mean, thankfully you felt embraced by love, by Jesus, and by this person and some others. What were some of the other voices saying? Some of the same old type, or?
Yeah. So, 10 years ago, I feel like it's so different now. When I see in therapy teenagers and young adults who are navigating this, and they're having such a different conversation now than when I did, because when I came out over 10 years ago now, it was, how to say, there was a bit more novelty to it. People didn't know as many gay people. It wasn't as common. So, most of the time it was actually really sweet. I experienced a lot of really good, I really think God put this in my life on purpose, but some really good people in my life, remember one person said, Gabe, I struggle with heterosexuality the way you struggle with homosexuality. Like less is less and sin is sin and all is fallen short. And I was like, really, I thought so now, but then that like created a lot of relief that I felt so alone in it. So I mostly experienced good, which I'm really thankful for.
Wow.
There were times where I experienced bad, which it came in the forms of like, oh, wow, thanks. And then like silence.
Yeah.
So silence felt like just really, people just didn't quite know what to do with that. I think purity culture had a big part of that. I remember sharing my story and like to a group of people, and the youth group leaders, it was like a group of people from different churches. Youth group leaders were just not okay with that story being shared on the stage. And so I was fortunate to have a person above me who organized it to say, this is what happened. I'm on your side. So I was really fortunate to have like some pretty amazing people in my life. And I think the hardest one was coming out to my family. So they started becoming more exhibiting like, Christian spiritual practices as I was at the same time, because they saw what it was like for me and were really attracted by that and were excited to see the hope that I had, because I struggled with depression as well. For them, there was just a lot of confusion and how to say, like wanting to do what was best for me. And it was all filled with love, but a lot of the time it was them working out their realization, or like in a way, like just not knowing some things.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's kind of my experience of people's response. I'm just, like I said, so grateful that it was mostly good.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So the church that you kind of became a Christian in, or that, I mean, I guess that experience, your early church experience, here we get to another big loaded term. Was that an evangelical church, or were those early ones considered evangelical?
So I came out at a church that I found myself. So I moved out when I was 18.
Okay.
And the church that I grew up in was a Southern Baptist church.
Okay.
And the pastor came from a Roman Catholic background. And so he brought in some of those traditions that he liked. So it was an interesting experience.
Wow.
The one that I came out in was a non-denominational church and would describe itself as evangelical. So, yeah. So
you said you had thankfully a positive experience in a lot of ways with different individuals, in that church, and who, you just said, we love you, period, through, so today, I mean, you have in some ways evangelical background. You came to an evangelical seminary, would you consider yourself evangelical?
I hold that term with conflict.
Yeah.
When I see like the definition of evangelical,
yeah.
I'm like, yes.
What definition? I just use that word, and you can ascribe like all sorts of meanings to it, right?
For sure. I mean, because it's become a cultural thing. It's become talk about like using gay as an identity, evangelical as an identity. And talking about like, what is the evangelical lifestyle?
Right.
I think that could look a lot different for a lot of different people. And so
maybe like I'm evangelical attracted, but I don't have the lifestyle. I mean, right?
Yeah, evangelical attracted, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is that? Yeah. What are all the meanings that word has for you? What are all the loaded things?
Yeah. So when it comes to like spirituality, like when it comes to faith, like evangelical is, I think can be like a really beautiful thing, where it's like gospel centered, where it's like centered on Jesus and centered on what Jesus did on the cross. And that is something that I think is really grounding. and can like look like a lot of different ways. When it becomes political, when it becomes purposeful, agenda driven identity, that's when it becomes more complicated, when it's used for something else. I do think words are important, and to know what like things mean, because it's in those places of assumption that like so much meaning can be lost. For you even to like for us to have this conversation and explore what is evangelical, just shows how complicated it can become when things are assumed. So when it comes to its heart and mission, I think it is something refreshing. When it comes to more this cultural, I mean, even like I think Western, United States specific expression and identity of evangelical, it becomes more complicated, and I have a lot more resistance to being either grouped in that or like jumping on board with that, because there's been ways that I've seen and experienced ways that that's just been really hurtful for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel welcomed in evangelical spaces? And I know that's a broad term because there's a lot of those spaces, right? So
right now, I think the most salient part of my identity that I feel when I walk into evangelical spaces is my singleness, not so much my same-sex attraction.
Interesting.
And I, how to say? So I think like, when I go to like church, it's like more of my singleness that I feel confronted by. And even in my process coming out, people would identify as evangelical and not. They also landed on different things, but it was very relationship focused. Like I would come out and people say like, "Oh, okay, so that's how God made you. So you need to like live into that and get you a man to really show like God's great love." And then others would say, "Okay, this is an opportunity for like God's power of healing and redemption in your life, and so getting married to a woman is going to really show that." And in that whole process, it felt like, well, I feel like you're missing me.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and it's more about relationships. So I think the big thing is how a lot of evangelical spaces is not just like being straight being enough, but like, or like being the part of the identity, but being married and having kids as well.
In a relationship, so to speak, of some time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Wow.
So, on campus at Denver Seminary, that isn't, it's not as personal, it's more academic. And so that's not as as much of a part of myself that I feel confronted by, but I'm pretty strategic in being open with students. Like at some point in the semester when we're talking about something to challenge them, how would you work with a person of same sex who's gay, LGBTQ, because you got one right here, right in front of you. How do you talk about self-disclosure and be vulnerable appropriately and without inviting like something from a client to take care of you, or you're working out some of your own stuff. And so it becomes more of an academic exercise there, or an intellectual exercise. So yeah, those are the spaces right now that I feel like I'm navigating that the most.
Yeah. Wow. You mentioned a little earlier, you said purity culture had a little something to do with that. And I want to pull on that thread a little bit. First of all, what do you mean by purity culture? Another loaded term, right? And also like, how are you shaped or impacted by that? So let's go there. And then after that, I'm interested in talking about evangelicalism has all these little cultural baggage things or subculture kind of things. So purity culture being one of them. So we can maybe go to some of the other, but let's talk about purity culture and what your experience was of that and and how you understand that.
Yeah, I didn't hear or understand the term purity culture until I got into college, and that was when it was first introduced, and then didn't really see, and that was in 2020 to 2014, and then didn't really see, because after college I went and lived in China, helping a church plant there, and teaching English, and then came back in 2017 to start grad school. So it feels like there's this gap where I was just having a completely different conversation. It wasn't these cultural things that I was working through. Because when I came back to the United States, I stepped back into a conversation that felt like had jumped leaps and bounds, and I had to catch up to. And part of that was purity culture and confronting it, and how to say, reckoning with its impact. So I think at its heart, purity culture meant well, of wanting to protect kids from, I guess I'm trying to think of different words, but it was like sin and debauchery. But I think it was more than that. But it wasn't just about teen pregnancy and stuff like that. But I think initially started with like a call for a greater understanding of sexuality and sex, but it came from a place of fear and I guess control, that it was more focused on what not to do, instead of creating this inspiration of like, what is sex for, what is desire for, what does that actually draw us into. And I find that now more in my counseling work, because I'm pursuing a sex therapy certification through the Institute of Sexual Wholeness, and it's there that there's this greater unpacking of sex and sexuality, calling for something deeper. So again, I think with purity culture, it came from a place of wanting to protect and do the right thing, but in a way just missed the human relationship, and it became more about like what to do instead of the deeper work of, what do I want? Who do I want to be? Yeah. So those are some thoughts around purity culture that I have right now.
Yeah, and it's you're raising a new perspective for me, which I appreciate, because the evangelical subculture I grew up in. I mean, first of all, I'm not saying there weren't any LGBTQ kids in my youth group. I'm sure there were, but nobody talked about it, right? But purity culture was all about heterosexual, boy and girl don't have sex before you're married kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But what I hear you saying, it was really, and I can see, it's like, sex is bad, desire is sinful, just don't, whatever you are, right? Is that kind of how it was couched to you?
Yes. Like I remember in youth group. So what I learned from purity culture is male sexuality is dangerous and bad. We were in this tiny youth group room, and my youth minister brings in a chainsaw to talk about desire and rips it on, and it's just this like freaking loud chainsaw in this tiny room, and talking about like, this is what male sexual desire is like. It is, dangerous. It is a big thing, and you have to be so careful with it. So of course, like, then there's anxiety,
right?
I was navigating sexuality, and at that point, my closeted self was like, okay, when I have a girlfriend, am I going to hurt her? And that felt like terrifying. So again, I think using that fear, that how to say, that protective fear. Don't give into desire, because it's going to lead to this dangerous path, and lead to STDs in pregnancy. But missing like the heart of like actually how is desire good? How can it actually be integrated into spirituality?
Yeah.
How is it actually a part of like our draw towards worship and closeness with God and intimacy? Like that fear that I'd say block from going deeper into that actually impacted my spiritual development as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sexual development.
for sure. Are there what other cultural parts of evangelicalism have impacted you? I mean, we talked about purity culture. Are there others that you can think of off the top of your head? We've talked a little bit about the political side. I mean, you grew up in the Bible Belt, and so some of that was just in the water, not just in the church.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I think about the effect of like rationalism on the, I guess, Protestant evangelical church, and how that was expressed in like worship and in like church gatherings. There was this sterility to it, at least in the white, because the church I went to, Memphis is mostly black, but I went to a church that was all white, and so there was like some cultural divisions there, but there was this, it just stayed all very cognitive. It wasn't until I went to China and then uh, got in touch with other spiritual practices that how worship, how church can be more embodied, how I can like feel it in my body, and even like that's part of sexuality. I think sexuality is not just the erotic; it is a desire to know and be known, and it's just much bigger and greater than that. So there was, I mean, that's another part that I've had to like redeem in my walk is this control that it seemed to foster me, and not like a surrender to mystery that is God, and that is scary, but and vulnerable, but I think it's really good.
Yeah. Is there I mean, you still claim, well, you said you hold kind of tightly, or I mean, conflicted about like evangelicalism. And so when, if I say, are you evangelical, does it depend on who you're with? That's probably another contextual.
It can be. I will say that I am, no matter where, just because I think it, how to say, I do. I can't save evangelicalism, but I can invite deeper thoughts and confront expectations in both sides, whether somebody is like really skeptical of that, or is like when they're asking me if I'm evangelical, they're looking for like connection and safety. Because I also have like piercings, and so I look more queer. And I did even a few years ago, growing my hair out and all that stuff. So there is a motive behind asking, like, are you evangelical? Are you with me?
Yeah.
Or are you not?
Yeah.
And I want to invite a deeper level of witness than just that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like, well, you said some people ask that as kind of a boundary marker, right? I mean, are you with us or are you not? Have you ever gotten the sense, or do you feel like there's something you could do or say that suddenly you'll be kicked out somehow? Like, what gives you your evangelical card? Like, do you feel like somebody could take it away from you or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is, I've grown in that, but for such a long time, growing up in the closet, I mean, that creates wounds and scars that that create a reflex in me of insecurity, thinking like at any point the good things that I have will be taken away. So I have to do what is right, by the other's eyes, not by how I've worked it out. Or with God, So reflexively, I do feel like that card can be taken away, but I know in like more sober, less like more secure thoughts, like that is something that's not so insecure. And may reveal more about the other than about like me. If they want to take that card away.
I think if you laminate the card, it's harder to take it away.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
It's protected that way.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised no one has come up with some system to really issue a card. Actually. Given what about evangelicalism, right? We're both within it enough to know the dark sides. So
yeah. It's all in these subtle signals that to see if you're like a card holding member or not. And I think that's unfortunate. It comes to these like external things instead of like for somebody else to like, how do I get to know Gabe? Where's his heart? Instead of like these, okay, let me just make sure he's ticking the right boxes.
So what are some of those signals or terms or words that what are the fishing things what will people use to fish?
I think, so I also have a tattooed ring on my ring finger. And when I got this, it was also around the time that I came out, because I just felt like becoming a Christian was saying I do to Jesus. And it's like an engagement ring that I'm not going to be able to experience the fullness of marriage on this side of fullness, but it is like a promise that I was like, oh yes, I can look forward to that. And so some of the signals that people ask for are like, hey, where's your wife? When, before I got more piercings, people, I think, were more confused, or not confused, but like would ask for more of those signals. I think, having more external representation of like, hey, not that like, because piercings are something I wanted to do for a long time. But they've become a signal of like, of not something else, but I want to invite people into not, I guess, judging a book by its cover. So relationship status, where I go to church, what books I'm reading, what school did I go to,
just kind of sizing you up with all those different things.
What can even like what I ask for in prayer, like I feel like all those can be like used to like measure and judge. So those are like the things I asked about, but I also had people like just kind of take a look up and down, and all the like the subtle things that come on, and just how somebody like represents themselves. The clothes I wear. And just those more nonverbal ways of how I present myself.
Wow. Well, I mean, piercings and long hair, I mean, that immediately communicates, or a lot of people would say, well, that communicates something. And then it's like, well, okay, okay. Then we start subdividing into other categories from there. Well, maybe he's artistic. Well, that'd be okay. But maybe, it's like, right. And then value judgments with all of those different categories. Wow. You have had to straddle this. I mean, you've straddled a lot of lines or gaps or bridges in your life. So you've got, Christian and gay and counselor and single. I mean, there's all these pieces where you're navigating a lot of tensions on a regular basis.
Tension's the word. I remember when I first came out, there was this guy who he was a few years older than me, had come out and was like walking in, and it's like whenever I came out, people were like, "You should talk to this guy." It's because he's gay, or because he actually loves Jesus,
or does he have piercings?
Right.
Right.
And so it was like back to signaling. But talking to him, when I was first coming out, I asked him, in a way, the heart of my question was like, "What's the answer?" And he was like, "I hear your question, and I'm not going to tell you, because that is something that you have to walk out yourself. And while that was so frustrating because I was in such a hurt, like desperate place, that actually was an invitation for something deeper.
Yeah.
That helped me stay in the tension and not seek the comfort of a side.
Yeah.
That I think ultimately would have stopped my work.
Hmm.
But staying in the tension has helped me go deeper into not just sexuality, but all parts of my life.
Yeah. What do evangelicals, and hopefully some of them are listening, need to hear? Like if you're a prophet to evangelicalism, however you define that.
Yeah. Do your work.
And you know what? We talk about that, and in like, mental health land, we talk about do your work.
Yeah.
But say what that means. Like I go, oh yeah, exactly, right? But what does that mean to you as a counseling professor and a counselor? Yes. What does that mean?
For sure. I think it definitely comes from a place of bias for me because I do value the counseling field. But doing your work is going deeper with like what in some ways, while I'll encourage students, but also clients to like ask is like what needs are being worked out in the way that I am moving forward in this. So when I think about doing your work in a more existential, spiritual, and counseling sense is figuring out like where does my security lie? Where does my hope lie? On what foundation do I base my identity on? And even like questioning that foundation, not just to like be questioning, but to like really, I mean, that verse of working out your faith with fear and trembling really has stuck with me through my walk. So when I look at my life, doing my work has been, when I first came out, like asking the question, okay, what does scripture say about same-sex relationships? And then I could not separate other parts of scripture for me in that. Then it was like, okay, well, then what does God say about marriage? Okay, well, God created marriage out of who he is. Well, what does scripture say about who God is? And also, how do I experience that in the world and in community and in friendships and in nature, that I could not just pick things apart. It's all connected. So doing my work has been like not finding quick, easy answers. Has been reckoning with like, what am I actually looking for, and trying to work some things out. And what are like deep and significant ways I can meet those needs.
Yeah. So do your work is one thing for evangelical. What else do we need to hear? And not we and a you and we separated me. What do all of us, you and I, yeah.
Well, talk about all of us. I think looking around and seeing who I'm surrounded by, and do I have voices in my life that can challenge where I'm at? I think it's just so important for everybody to have a seat at the table. And what does that actually look like? I think that depends on the organization, the church, the community, whatever it is. But actually, like looking around, like, do I know others because they reflect me, or do I know others because they sharpen and challenge me? So I think that's another thing that I think about a lot with the evangelical church is what hurts it is when it becomes an echo chamber and it's all people saying the same thing to each other to not bolster, but like kind of work each other up and not actually invite other voices and experiences.
Into
that conversation.
As through our conversation, I'm thinking see each person. No, don't make assumptions. I mean, we talked about loaded terms, but and And partly we like that because we want to assign terms, and then that puts a box, or we can immediately just put this filter or grid on someone. And so, I think not making assumptions about terms or about people.
Yep. No, 100%. I mean, even I hear that thread through what I've shared.
Yeah.
And when I talk about like how I come off, or like in different seasons of my life that have been really important, is like has been a call and a desire being worked out in me of like asking people, "Are you with me in this?"
Yeah.
Because so often it's how to say, there's this anxiety of like, I just want to make sure they're okay, and that's actually not about you, but actually about the anxiety that I feel around you.
Yeah.
I'm just
because I can't be okay if you're not okay. Like, yeah.
And if you're single, then you're not okay.
Or
if you're same-sex attracted,
your singleness makes me uncomfortable, or your same-sex attraction makes me uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
There's the narratives all around that.
Yeah.
Come from a place of like, there must be something wrong in that. And instead of like, just sitting with me in it and help and being with me and figuring it out.
Yeah.
But also hearing my heart in where those labels, identities are coming from. Like what I mean when I say those things.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Completely shifting gears, and we're recording this, and I'm looking outside, and the fall colors are gorgeous.
Oh my word!
Aren't they amazing? I mean, somebody said, "In Denver freezing?" I'm like, no, Denver is gorgeous right now.
It is gorgeous.
Yeah. What is bringing you life in life right now?
Yes, I absolutely the fall. I mean, there are some days I'm just driving around, and there's just this big old grin on my face.
Yeah,
it's so beautiful. I love it. What's giving me life right now? Right now, there's a lot of things in my work and both adjuncting and in counseling that are just like really exciting. And this like learning process that I'm doing in the certification program that I'm in has been like really exciting as well. I'm kind of a learner, and so like getting into like new things that I can like chew on and sink my teeth into, like it'd be really fun.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. Well, Gabriel, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm glad I get to still see you around, bump into you on campus from time to time. And just blessings. We'll look forward to next time I bump into you, maybe with these fall leaves falling.
Whoop, whoop.
I know.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Angie.
Thanks, Gabriel.